Hi everyone. This is kind of in response to some questions I've had recently. I'll try and keep this as kind of quick as I can, really, as it is a quick tip. I've had people ask about how to paint in very hot conditions or in very not hot conditions. And actually, when painting on plein air, which is what I've been talking about in my other video today, this can be a problem. If you're painting on a really hot day, especially if you use a metal palette, things can dry out too quickly on the palette, and then you can find that you can be squirting gallons of water on there and it's just going before you can even get it onto the page, and that's really annoying. Or you make a few mixes up and you paint one area, and when you go back to use the same mix again, it's dry, and by the time you've added water to it and got it to exactly the same consistency as you had before, otherwise it would be too light or too dark, you kind of ruined it. So a tip when painting on plein air, if you want to retard the evaporation as much as possible and make things stay wet longer, is that in the water you use in your water brushes and everything else is to add glycerine. And glycerine is a humectant. It absorbs water from the air, so it will keep that liquid wet as long as possible and stop it evaporating effectively. It will mean your paint on the paper stays wetter longer, so you may have to leave things to dry a little bit longer, but if you're painting on a hot day, that should not really be a problem. How much to use is kind of variable, and you're going to have to experiment with this because there is no simple answer. But I would say I often use these 100 ml bottles to carry my water when I'm in the field, and I would add to that on a hot day probably not more than 5 milliliters, a teaspoon of glycerine. And a tip for getting glycerine to dissolve is you fill your bottle with hot water from the tap, add your glycerine to that, put the lid on, and mix it by inversion like this. Don't shake it. And when all the swirly lines have gone and there's no lumps of glycerine left, let it go cold and then use it as you normally would. You can put that in a water brush totally safely. You can use it with your brushes, with any fibre brushes. It will not cause any damage. You may find afterwards the brushes take longer to dry because that's the effect it has. It won't damage your paints at all. You may find actually that it, especially with cheap paints, it might actually improve their performance a little bit. So what you will find with it is that things will dry slower. You will find that things will probably re-wet quite easily as well. So if you're wanting to do glazing, you might find that you need to let it really bone dry before you do it, because it won't necessarily work quite correctly, but it shouldn't leave a residue anywhere at that concentration. It should be okay. Practice it, see how it goes. If you live in Arizona, you might need more. What I call a hot day in the UK is usually very humid, so I wouldn't need necessarily so much as you'd need in a really dry environment. On the flip side, if you're painting in a really, really cold, humid environment where things take an absolute age to dry, or you're somewhere cold, like, heading towards the Arctic Circle where things don't evaporate too quickly, there is an alternative option, and you do the same kind of trick. You take your water bottle and you add to it, in this case, 2 tablespoons of vodka, really cheap, filthy vodka, the one that's just got like vodka and the barcode and nothing else, the really, really cheap stuff. Put that in, and the alcohol that's in it will mean that everything should evaporate a little bit quicker, so things will dry out faster, which in the cold, humid environment will mean it will kind of work like it would on a normal kind of day. You can use rubbing alcohol or 95% alcohol if you have access to that, or grain alcohol, but what you're really aiming for with that is balance it to what I said with vodka. If I say 2 tablespoons of vodka in 100 milliliters, that's 2 tablespoons of 40% alcohol. If you've got a grain spirit that's like 90% alcohol, you're probably going to need like half the amount, like 1 tablespoon. But again, you're going to need to play with that. So ethanol, i.e. the alcohol we drink, if you want the things to dry quicker. Glycerine if you want them to dry slower. Be a little bit careful with rubbing alcohols because some of them are made with something called isopropanol, which is slightly greasier than ethanol, and it behaves a little bit differently. So if you're using rubbing alcohol, check the bottle that it is an ethanol or ethyl alcohol based rubbing alcohol. If it says it contains propanol, isopropanol, propan-2-ol, 2-propanol, propyl alcohol, anything like that, don't use that for this technique because it's not really suitable. You need one that's got ethanol in it. Make sure it hasn't got any denaturants. So like methylated spirit, the pink one, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, or I think it's usually yellow in Australia or green in Australia, you can't use that because the colour obviously will get in the way. Similarly, if it smells disgusting and nothing like alcohol, it's probably got pyridine in to stop people drinking it. I wouldn't recommend you use that either, or anything like surgical spirit that's got castor oil in it, because that's going to cause you problems. You want a pure alcohol, and the way to do that is to use vodka. It's easy to get hold of. It's 40% alcohol. The really cheap stuff is literally pure alcohol dissolved in water. There are no other ingredients, so you won't have any problems with it. And I do know some people who actually paint with a 1-to-1 mix of vodka and water because it dries really quickly, and that can be really good if that's what you want. Alternatives, if you want things to dry slower and you don't have access to glycerin, you could try adding a bit of OXGALL. OXGALL's got all sorts of different effects, but I would say if you want to use it, I would use it with glycerine, and I would just add a single drop, 1 drop of OXGALL to a bottle this size of OXGALL solution, which is the sort of opaque, looks like a terrible urine infection kind of bottles. If you just do that, what that will mean is that when you've got it on your paints, they'll re-wet reasonably easily in that hot environment that you're painting in. So there's my quick tip for you for painting in extreme environments where you need things to dry quicker or slower. Glycerine and alcohol are your friends.